Good morning and welcome to Google Partners Academy on Air series. My name is Ogie. I work as a measurement and attribution specialist here on the UK team. And today I'm joined with Kelsey. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, I'm Kelsey. I'm also a Google attribution and measurement product expert working with agencies in the UK.
Great. So guys, today's Academy on Air session is we're going to cover Google Analytics setup best practices and health check for those who already have their accounts set up. The content we're going to cover today is firstly looking at why it's important. We'll then run through the general account setup and how to best set up your account and properties. We'll then review your tracking setup and how to ensure your traffic is correctly tracked. We're then going to look into traffic sources and how to ensure that traffic is correctly categorized within your account. We'll then look at goals and transactions and look at actually tracking the most important metrics whenever users get to your website. We'll then look at linking your accounts and how to link your analytics with your Google Ads account. And finally, we're going to cover off the discrepancies between analytics and Google Ads and why they exist and how to kind of deal with them. So why is a Google Analytics health check important and relevant to you? We'll see here that leading marketers across the ecosystem are recognizing the opportunity made available by leveraging measurement and data across the industry. And we see here this quote from Keith Weed, the CMO of Unilever, that measurement has become a hot conversation. Sorting out the digital ecosystem should be a priority for everyone in our industry. Another data point for you here is that by being data-driven and combining data sources, you can move your business forward and drive results. We see from this study from eConsultancy that 2.6 times sales growth was achieved over a 3-year period for businesses that integrated multiple customer and marketing data sources compared to their peers. So look at how measurement enables business growth. Firstly, we look at establishing a source of truth. So if you're measuring correctly, you have a source of truth for your business data. You understand what's working well and how it's working. That allows you then to essentially derive insights from that data and understand who your customers are, what their customer journey looks like, and actually how they're engaging with your business. When we understand the insights coming from our data, that allows us to put those insights to use and take action. And what I mean by referring to that essentially is using those insights to make decisions and look at where we allocate our marketing resources and budgets in terms of what digital channels are most effective and utilize those to best effect. So we can understand that, I guess, as advertisers across the world, you all use web analytics tools to inform business decisions. However, website and advertising decision-making, our solution for this essentially is Google Analytics. This is one of the most popular platforms across the web, and it's our solution to essentially web analytics. It's an easy-to-use interface with shareable reports available. It offers machine learning-powered insights for you to use. And it also has seamless integration with your Google Ads account, which is very convenient for making changes. And that allows for data-driven decision-making, which I guess is the be-all and end-all of that. So I guess if we look at the importance of a healthy Google Analytics account and why we're here today, we understand that data in Google Analytics influences your business decisions, including your decisions within Google Ads, but also across other marketing tools. And therefore, we want to ensure that you have the most effective and up-to-date data within your analytics account in order for you to make those business decisions and ensure that they are as accurate as possible. So that leads me into handing over to Kelsey, who's going to discuss the account setup within your analytics account.
Perfect. Thanks, Ogie. So first thing what we're going to do is walk through an ideal analytics account. And don't worry if yours is set up slightly different than what we're going to recommend. This is just the best practices that we see. Perfect. So to kick it off, what we're going to do here is look at an account structure. So you're going to start off with an account, and then underneath that, you'll have a property. So a property is a subcomponent of an analytics account that determines how the data is organized and stored together. So normally under one account, you'll have multiple properties. So the image that you see here will be a much bigger triangle. And within those, you have the ability to track each of your digital assets independently. So if you have a website and maybe a mobile app, you could have 2 different properties, one for each. Now, a single property can be used to collect and store information together. So if you happen to have multiple websites, let's say you've got a .com and a .co.uk, you can either store those together in the same property or separately. And then under each property, you'll have a view or a reporting view. And that, again, is just a subset of an account property that can have its own unique configuration setup. So within each property, you can, and we actually recommend having multiple views for a single property. And this will allow you to configure and show subsets of the data differently for each individual property. So within this, you'll be able to set up different filters or customized views, and we'll get into that in a bit as to what those views should look like. The main thing to remember here is that when you create a view, you'll only be able to see data from that creation date forward. You won't be able to backtrack and add in data. Also, if you delete a view, that specific perspective is going to be gone forever, so be very careful with how you handle views. So first things first, we want to look at how you actually create a view. So this is pretty simple. What you want to do is go into your analytics account, navigate into the settings, and then make sure you select the right property. Again, you can have multiple properties under each individual account, so make sure you pick the right one. And then under that property, you're going to select the plus key, and you should be able to create a new view. You'll then just need to make sure to select the right name and a correct time zone and currency, which you should see demonstrated here on the screen. Perfect. So now we're going to look at views. And as I said, you can have multiple views under each property. And within this, we actually recommend 3 as a best practice, and then you can create multiple views. Everyone's going to have some slight differences for their business. So these are just the best practices, and you can create custom ones from here. So the first one that we always recommend creating is what's called the raw data view. And this is exactly as it sounds. It houses the raw data. So within this view, there should be no goals, no site search, no filters, no reports, absolutely nothing. The whole purpose of this is to provide a fail-safe in case you accidentally delete a view or another view becomes corrupted. So in case you happen to lose all of your other data, you'll still have this one source of truth to go back to that has all of your data. The second one that you want to look at is the master view. So the master view should be your main view that you're going to use for all of your reporting, your insights, and evaluating the success of your campaigns. This should be the default view in all of your accounts that you have linked. So when you're using this again should be where you do all of your analysis. So you want to be very careful with your settings and making sure that you're not skewing the data that could lead to the wrong decisions. So once you have your master view created and you put in a few filters, you want to try and leave it and try not to tweak it too often. If you do decide to do tweaks, you'll want to set up a test view, which we'll talk about in a second. So within a master view, you might see a few main filters that you would see across any account. So the first is excluding internal traffic. Generally, what we want to do with this data is understand how your consumers and external users are interacting with your site, not your employees. So you probably want to filter them out. The second one that you might see are geo filters. So if you have different sales regions set up, let's say the Americas, EMEA, and APAC, you can consolidate those countries into a view in your master view. And then the last one that we're going to look at here is a test view, which I mentioned earlier. So the test view, again, is exactly as it sounds. This is where you can test all of your settings before you apply it to another view in case you accidentally corrupt the data or apply the settings wrong. So if you do decide that you want to create a new test or a new filter, what we recommend is using this test view, apply it here first, and then watch the data for a few days and make sure that it's reporting as you think it should. And then if there's something wrong, you've done it in your test view and it's not impacting your master view or the other views that you want to see. So as I said, these are the 3 that we typically recommend implementing across all accounts, but you can have several more. So some other common ones that we typically see are a user ID view. So if you've implemented user IDs and you have logged in information on your website, you can go ahead and create those. Or if you have any other custom views, this is optional. Again, if you have questions around this, it's going to be very dependent on your business and your business goals. So if you have questions on this, I'd actually recommend talking to your Google account manager about this rather than the Q&A session we'll have at the end. Perfect. Okay, so the next thing that we want to look at is time zone and currency. I know this can seem very basic, but it is really important to making sure you're looking at the right data. So to set this up, what you'd want to do is go into the view, under view settings, and then time zones and currency, which you can again see demonstrated here on the screen. Now with this, ideally you'd want to make sure that your Google Ads and your analytics, both currency and time zone, are aligned. So you make sure that you're looking at the wrong data. If they are off, the data will look very different. Perfect. And then the last thing that we'll look at here is setup. So with your advertising and reporting features here, this will give you another layer of data that you can use in analytics. So within any standard analytics property, you'll be able to see some of the basic settings. And when you turn on advertising and reporting features, we'll be able to get more of an understanding of the audience that's actually viewing your site. So you'll be able to see things like demographics and an interest report. You'll also be able to turn on remarketing. So if you do plan to use to re-engage with users, you'll be able to follow up and create those here. Now the setup is actually fairly simple. All you have to do is go under Property Settings, under Tracking Info, Data Collection, and then you'll see two different switches. The first is for advertising reporting features, and then the second is for remarketing, again, which you can see demonstrated on the screen. Perfect. Okay, so now hopefully we've got the account set up and structured properly. Now what you want to think about is how you're actually tracking the data and organizing it accordingly. So first thing that you want to look at is fairly basic. You want to make sure that you're actually tracking everything on your website. So what you want to do is make sure that you've got the new universal analytics code, that's the analytics.js, or the new gtag.as, implemented across right after every head tag on the pages of your website. Or if you have Google Tag Manager, you can use that as well. Now, if you're having trouble with this and want to check and make sure that things are set up correctly, you can look at two different options. So the first one is GA Checker. This is a tool that will crawl your entire site to ensure that all pages are tagged, and it's a good starting point to make sure that things are set up correctly. If you have a very large site, what I'd recommend is setting up a filter to show rows without a tag to make it easier to go through the data. The second thing that you can use is Google Tag Assistant, which you can see on your screen here on the right-hand side. This is a Chrome extension. And with this, what it'll be able to do is ensure that your tags are firing correctly on every page of the website. So if a tag doesn't show up as green, which you can see at the bottom of the page there, the green tag means everything's set up and tracking correctly. If you happen to see the blue or the red tags, again, which you can see on the screen, that means there's something that we're identifying that's wrong with that setup. You should be able to click in and get more information, but if you're still having issues, you can talk to your Google Account Manager, and we'll be able to put you in contact with someone that can help you figure out what's going on. Correct. The next thing, oops, skip the page here. The next thing that we're going to look at is subdomain tracking. So subdomain is a different website that shares the same domain as your main website. So let's say you have a website that's example.com. You might also have a blog and an e-commerce site that are associated with that same domain. So that would would be, as you can see on the screen, blog.example.com and ecommerce.example.com. So what we would recommend is excluding your own subdomain from the list of referrals. So a referral is a website that links to your site that don't belong in organic search, paid search, social, or email. So let me explain why this matters. When your users moves from one domain to another, including the subdomains of the same domain, the Universal Analytics code will send refer information to Google Analytics. And then when Google Analytics sees a new refer that is different from the original source and medium information, it will start a new session from a new traffic source with this information. The referral exclusion list will prevent this from happening, and it will let you see the original session continue. So if you have subdomains and want to make sure that the traffic from one of those domains to another is not considered a referral, what you need to do is add that to the exclusion list. So to do this, you can see it on your screen here. You go into Settings at the property level under Tracking Info, and then you'll see a section for Referral Exclusion List. Then you would just add the shared domain to that list. So in the case here where you've got the blog.example.com and the ecommerce.example.com, you would add just the main domain, example.com, to the list, and that will be excluded. So you'll also want to consider doing this for third-party payment providers. So if you don't want them to show up as a referral. So let's look at an example. Imagine you have a consumer that clicks on your ad, lands on your website, decides to buy a product. So they go through the whole purchase flow, and then once they get to the payments, they're redirected to your provider. Let's say it's PayPal. So they go to the PayPal website, and then they come back and they see the thank you for ordering page on your screen that they've confirmed they bought the order. So you'd obviously want Google Analytics to show that that conversion and that goal came from your ad and not from PayPal. So to do this, you would want to go ahead and exclude your payment provider from that source, just like you did in the previous example. It's the exact same process where you would add that payment provider to the exclusions list for referrals, and that way we'll be able to actually see your ad or direct traffic is leading that confirmation and not your payment provider. Perfect. So now that you've got everything set up correctly, what we want to start to think about is how we're looking at traffic source tagging in analytics so we can understand where a user comes from and then categorize those accordingly into different buckets. So this would be how we categorize things like organic search, paid search, social, and email. And you specifically want to look at how we do this automatically for our paid channels. So first, what we're going to do is take a look at Google Ads. So if you want to ensure that your Google Ads media is correctly reflected in analytics, we strongly recommend using auto tagging. So auto tagging is a way to automatically import Google Ads data into analytics. It combines all of the Google Ads data with all of the post-click information that you'll be able to see in analytics. So you'll be able to see what happens after someone actually clicks on your ad. So when you enable auto tagging, you'll add a parameter which is known as a GCLID or a Google Click ID. That's going to be added to your landing page URL. So when a user clicks to your site that's from an ad, you'll be able to see. Let's take an example here. You've got mysite.com. That's going to be the name of your website. So when they click on your ad, in the address bar, instead of seeing just mysite.com, you'll see a / GCLID equals and then an ID after that. That's how we'll be able to track that information of what happens with that click in analytics. And this is actually one of the few things that you'll have to set up in Google Ads as opposed to Google Analytics. So if you go into Google Ads, as you can see here demonstrated on the screen, what you'll need to do is go into the Settings tab, and then you'll see an option for auto tagging, and you just need to make sure to check the box next to that to enable auto tagging. And again, if you want to make sure that all of your Google Ads media is tagged correctly, you want to turn on auto tagging. You don't want to use UTM parameters, which we'll talk to you about in a bit. UTM parameters should only be used for non-Google media. So with that, let's look at UTM parameters. So if you have, again, non-Google media, so you're not tracking from Google Ads, what you want to do is use UTM parameters. So by adding campaign parameters to the destination URLs, you can use them in your ad campaigns, and you can collect information about the overall efficiency of the campaign, and so you can figure out which campaigns are more effective. So again, let's take a look at an example. If you've got, let's say, a summer sale going on, you might have campaigns that are generating a lot of revenue, and you might be running them across several different social apps, and you want to know which one of them is driving you the most customers or getting you the most revenue. Or let's say you're running several different versions of the same campaign. You have multiple different channels, things like email, video ads, and in-app, and you want to compare the results between those to see which one is most effective. So when a user clicks on the referral link, the parameters are sent to analytics, and then all of the data that you provide us will be available in the campaigns report. And you can build this URL in the aptly named campaign URL builder in analytics. This will simply add this URL that you create here as the destination URL in all of your non-Google Ads campaigns. So a few best practices that you want to remember. So again, I'll say this multiple times and I'll say it again. You don't want to use UTM parameters for Google Ads media. That should be done with auto tagging, which we talked about on the previous slide. The second is that when you're actually going in and creating using the URL builder tool, you only want to add the variables that you need. As you can see on the screen here, there's several different variables that you can include. Only include the ones that are important to you. And then finally, you want to be careful about sending PII, that's personally identifiable information. You don't want to send anything like emails, names, phone numbers. That should not be sent or included with the UTM parameters. Perfect. And then the last thing that we're going to look at here are channel groupings. So channel groupings are ways of categorizing sources of your website traffic. So Google will do this automatically for you with things like paid search, direct, organic, display, etc. And for most people, those basic channel groupings are going to be enough. However, if you want to be able to create your own channel groupings and do a bit more analysis of the channels, you can go ahead and start to create them at a more granular level. So let's take a look at an example of this. As a default channel grouping, you'll see display. But let's say you've got a lot of display campaigns going on, a pretty robust effort, and you want to be able to break those down in more detail. What you can do is create custom channel groupings for things like GDN prospecting display or GDN retargeting display, or even just non-Google display. You'll be able to create those on your own. So to do that, there's two different ways that you can actually go about creating your own channel groupings. So the first is option A. So this is where you can edit your default channel groupings yourself. Oops, here we go. So with option A, again, you're creating your own channel groupings. And then option B, you're creating custom channel groupings here. So they're two very, very different approaches. Neither one is going to be the right way to do it. You want to make sure to choose the one that's right for you. So by editing the default channel groupings, you shouldn't do this very often, and it's only going to allow you to create one set of groupings. If you're doing custom channel groupings, on the other hand, you'll be able to create several different groupings at the same time, and it's a lot more flexible of an option. So you can do both option A and option B at the same time. So let's take a look at these in a bit more detail. So again, with option A, this is where you're editing the default groupings. This is where it's going to permanently change the raw data in Google Analytics going forward, and it's not possible to fix mistakes in the past. It will also apply to the whole view. So going back to the beginning where we were talking about creating different views, this is one I would probably go ahead and test in that test view before you apply it to any other views that you might want to measure it in. This also doesn't change any of the historical channel groupings. It will just change the data moving forward. And finally, you'll be able to use this channel grouping via the API in BigQuery, and then at the standard channel reports in the UI. So I'm looking over at option B. Again, this is where you can go ahead and create your own custom channel groupings. This one's nice because it's completely risk-free. You can immediately select it in the reports, and you can apply it retroactively and look at historical data to classify that's classified by your new definitions that you've just created. However, the thing to note with this is that it's only available to the user who actually creates them. You do have the ability to create, or to promote or share those with other users, but by default, it's only visible to you, not anyone else looking at the analytics account. It's also not available to use via the API or in BigQuery. So when you create custom channel groupings in option B, we'd also recommend starting with the existing channel groupings. So as you can see from the example, we started with display and then start to modify those rather than starting from scratch. So as I said, if you're choosing between option A or option B within channel groupings, there's no wrong way to go. You just want to make sure that you're choosing the one that's right for your business. Perfect. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Ogi to talk about goals and transactions.
Great. Thank you very much, Kelsey. So I guess now technically the account is very well set up. We have set up our properties and our views. We know the structure is looking good, and we understand where our traffic is coming from. And we've also categorized it so we understand how organized it is, and we can look at using different sources and mediums and understand exactly where our traffic is coming from. But I guess we don't really want to stop there. With a business, you obviously have more important goals than just driving traffic to your website, and we want users to actually engage with your content. So if you're, a retailer, you might look at actually someone buying products on your website. If you're in lead gen, you might look at someone filling in a form or submitting details for you to reach out to that user. And that's whenever we look at going into goals and transactions and actually understanding and measuring how users engage with your website once they land there. So when we look at setting up goals in analytics, we want to clarify what the most important goal is for your business and ensure that we're tracking and defining them correctly. So some kind of standard or important goals for businesses will be looking at, say, leads, try a demo, watching a video, you're looking at time spent on the website, or more importantly for a retailer, we'll be looking at purchases. There's 4 different ways that we can actually track these different goals within our analytics platform. The first one, which some of you may be very familiar with, as it's similar to what we can do in AdWords, is tracking URLs or a destination URL. And what this essentially allows us to do is, if you use an example, it allows you to track a thank you page. So if someone goes to a cart checkout, they submit their order, and they are loaded with a thank you page or an order confirmation, we can track that confirmation page to ensure that we know that that action has been completed. The second one, and these are the last 3 are all exclusive just to analytics, we look at time on site. And essentially this is understanding a level of engagement, sometimes seen as a micro conversion, but looking at how long a user spends on your website once they get there. And this is a really good understanding for us to see how engaged they are with your content and how relevant they are to you. Next up, we look at page visits. And essentially, this again is an engagement level metric to look at how many pages a user goes to whenever they land on your website. Again, a really good understanding of how interested they are and how engaged they are with the website. Finally is events, and events are slightly more complex, but essentially an example of this will be looking at a click of a phone number or a click of a button on a website. You do need to put in place a small bit of coding to activate this, but it is quite straightforward. And essentially, if there's any important events or actions on your website that you want someone to take on the site, we would look at actually putting these event goals in place. How do we actually set up these goals? So within your account, you would actually look at going into your admin section. From there, navigate to the view, and under view, go into goals. Within the goals section, you'll have the option to go plus new goal, and that's actually where you'll then go to create a goal. And we're going to go through that just in a few moments. So if we look at here, essentially, this is the menu which will be brought forward whenever you go in to create a new goal. And the first option within that is your goal description. So here, it's very important to make sure that the name of the goal is something which is clearly identifiable, and it marks it as specific as possible. For an example, you might have a thank you page for Purchase UK, and therefore we understand that that is the thank you page that's activated after someone makes a purchase on your UK site. And this should be something which anyone in the business will be able to view and understand exactly what it means. It should be very clear to understand. The second option, we go through what we just mentioned before, the 4 different types. So we select the type that we want to use. So if we're using a destination, we would select that, or vice versa with any of the other options, we select the type which we want to use. Following on from here, we actually look at one really important example. If we are using a destination-based one, which will be quite common, that we look at the between equals to, begins with, or regular expression. And this is quite important. Regular expression is something which may need to be used if, for an example, we have a checkout success page, which loads with a different number after each user who makes a purchase. So that would be, for an example, /checkout/success /12345. However, as the number after this changes each time, we need to just have the regular expression which remains consistent. In this case, that would be your /checkout /success. However, there's one really handy feature here which I would really advise you to use. Whenever you do put in a URL in this section, there's a test and verify section below which will give you an estimate of how many conversions have came through in the last 7 days. And this is a good way to make sure and check, is your destination URL that you've placed in the correct one that you want to be tracking, and will it work to track conversions going forward? On top of that, we also want to look at the funnel visualization. And this is important no matter what business model. We look at an example here for a retailer, but I also want to go through maybe an example if you're in lead generation. So funnel visualization essentially is looking at the stages that a user gets to before they make the ultimate action. So if your ultimate action is, for example, a form fill, it might be getting to the Contact Us page, going to the form itself, and then actually submitting that form. So there could be 3 different steps involved, and we want to measure all of them. A more common example that you might be more familiar with would be looking at a retailer as we have it in front of us here. An example of a very traditional purchasing path for a user on an e-commerce website will be adding an item to their cart, going to the checkout. Then from there, going to their shipping information and entering their details of their shipping address. Following through, then going to payments, and finally going into actual checkout and paying and payment completion, which is the confirmation. This is something which, yes, it's very good for understanding how users are engaging through your funnel, but even more so importantly, it's a good understanding of where users are potentially dropping off within that conversion journey, because we can see how many users get to cart versus how many users get to confirmation. And therefore, if there's any stage within this journey that users are dropping off consistently, it's an opportunity for us to look at reviewing our website and seeing, is there any issues with that stage of the funnel, and is there any concerns? Potentially autofill is not enabled, and therefore their address cannot pre-populate, which makes things a little bit more challenging. And these are the kind of things we need to consider whenever we are putting this in place. And it's a really useful metric for you to measure that customer journey essentially on your website. We go a little step further into e-commerce, because with e-commerce, it's obviously not as straightforward as actually just selecting a purchase or the number of purchases, because we know that with e-commerce, the value of different purchases can be substantially different. Whether someone is buying a pair of socks versus buying a new jacket, the monetary value is very different, and therefore just tracking the number of sales really isn't enough for us whenever we're an e-commerce business. So what we look at doing here essentially is within analytics, we can enable what's called e-commerce tracking. And this is done very simply through your view section, again, under the admin within your account, and go to e-commerce settings. And as you can see here on the screenshot, turning both of these features on. However, there is a small bit of a more complex structure whenever it comes to actually enabling this on your website, because there is a need to actually install coding on your site, which will actually allow you to track those values of sales. And the full order value can be then imported into analytics. So if you yourself are comfortable with HTML and JavaScript, you can go ahead and do this yourself. However, a lot of individuals may look at actually getting an experienced web developer to do this job for them. It isn't a massive job, but it is slightly complex, and therefore would advise going to a web developer if you're not experienced within those types of coding. Once that is enabled, there is just one other final check that we want to look at. We want to make sure that the e-commerce platform that you're utilizing, so like a third-party web shop, for example, Magento, that they actually provide the data to us, and that we can actually link that with analytics. Some platforms may not, but the majority will, and just making sure that your web shop will actually link and share the data with analytics so we can use those monetary values in our account going forward. Great. So once we actually have set up all of our goals and transactions, whether that's form submissions, lead generation, or tracking purchases, we have that data within analytics for us to look at viewing and analyzing. However, we want to actually look at then linking that information with our Google Ads account or with any other marketing platforms that we want to utilize in order to use that data for best effect when decision making within our accounts. So we want to kind of take advantage of this, and within Google Ads, for an example, we want to look at linking all of your relevant accounts. So some of you may look at splitting out your accounts based on your search and shopping advertising, potentially having your display or marketing in a separate account, and maybe a video account separate to that. If those accounts are all within the one MCC account, we would look at linking additionally all relevant accounts, but also if they're within an MCC, actually linking the full MCC account to your to your Google Analytics, and then actually enabling MCC level conversion data. And what that allows us to do is, if a sale does have multiple touch points across the journey, it allows us to understand across those accounts how they're actually engaging with your business, and import and share that conversion data across the 3 to 4 different accounts that you may be using. So whenever you have the accounts linked, we want to actually look at not just viewing the account and having it linked, but actually incorporating those metrics and pulling in the conversion data into our Google Ads account for us to actually action and utilize in the account. This is something which is a quite straightforward step. Whenever you go into your conversion section of your AdWords account, you'll see under conversion actions a blue plus icon. Within here, you'll have the option to import conversions, and then you can simply select Google Analytics, and all of the goals which you already have predefined and created within your Analytics account are then available for you to import here very simply. One thing that I'd just like to note on this section is that if you do, for example, in this instance, have transactions coming from website, which is a Google AdWords conversion tag, and you then want to import your transactions from Google Analytics also, I would recommend only including one of these actions within your Google Ads account. And you'll see that here in the including conversions column on the right-hand side. The reason for this is if we include both, we may see a duplication effect of conversions because we're counting them once with our AdWords tag, and we're counting them then a second time with our Google Analytics tag. So therefore, this would be a duplication of data. So it's just an important thing to note. Second, on that kind of a similar point, we can import as many goals or conversion actions as we want, but we want to only include the imported actions within your conversions in the account. Everything else can be seen within your all conversions section. However, we want to just show your kind of macro or most important conversion actions to be included in your reporting metrics within your AdWords account. And finally, so once we have all of our goals created, they're linked up with our AdWords account, and we're now importing those goals so we can utilize them from a measurement perspective and making decisions within our AdWords account. You may see that there's some discrepancies. And this is something which is totally normal, and it's not an issue with either account. It's essentially just due to the difference in nature of how the two platforms track conversions and measure goals, essentially. And I'm going to talk you through 2 of the most common reasons for discrepancies, why they occur. And we look at the first one here. We look at why are there discrepancies between both accounts. And the first one is actually looking at the difference in the way the platforms can report in terms of the time. So with Google Ads, we see that a conversion is recorded on the date of a click. So therefore, someone clicks on an ad on the 1st of December. That is the date that the conversion is tracked. However, if we see with Analytics, that sale did not actually occur until December 9th. And Analytics, in retrospect, only actually will track the conversion on the day of sale. So essentially, we have there, in that instance, you have your 9 days difference between conversions. And that's where there will always be a discrepancy. The same conversion is being tracked when a sale actually takes place, but the time difference between both conversions will cause both platforms to report slightly different numbers. And this is mainly based on the time lag of your conversion. So the longer your time lag, the bigger discrepancies which you may expect to see. And that's essentially for that direct reason is due to when the platforms track the goals. The second reason there may be some slight discrepancies within your account is actually down to the difference between Google AdWords tags and Google Analytics tags and their ability to track. So tracking tools essentially use their own attribution logic for creating conversions based on the data scope that they have available. With Analytics, it obviously has data scope across multiple touch points and multiple channels. So if we look at an example as per here on the screenshot, we can see that over a 30-day conversion window, a common customer journey may look something like this. Someone goes through a Google Display Network ad. They then view a video on YouTube. They then see an advertisement on social media. They then follow through to Google Search Network with a generic paid search click. They then follow through again and actually come back on another click through a branded search. And finally, they actually go through an external display remarketing. So from another provider from Google, not Google, someone goes through a display remarketing click. What we see in this example, firstly, if we look at analytics tags and how they report, analytics has access to all the data points, and therefore it understands every different interaction that a user has had with your website, and it reports on the last non-direct click before the sale occurs. So in this example, you'll see here, display remarketing is what will get the credit for that conversion in place. If we look at Google AdWords, we'll see that AdWords only has insights or data from clicks that have came through AdWords. So as you'll see here, it doesn't understand that a social click has happened or display remarketing click has happened. It just looks at the Google clicks that have occurred on that journey before the purchase occurred. And therefore, Google AdWords will give it to the last Google AdWords click that it enabled before that actual individual purchased. So therefore, we see the Google branded paid search click will be what gets the credit for the conversion in this example. And so you guys, that's the two reasons. So the first one is the time lag, and also the difference between the two types of tags and how they can report due to the limitations of each platform. But there will always be discrepancies. It's not a problem. It's not something to be alarmed about. And it's just something which you should be aware of and should understand why they occur, and to understand that this will always happen in the account. It's not a problem. It's not an issue to be raised, but just understand how it can occur. So guys, that brings us to the end of today's session, and we're going to just open up for a Q&A. I'd just like to kind of take note, firstly, is to say that if you have very specific questions in relation to your own analytics account or within individual conversion actions or goals that are very specific to your business, we would like you to kind of refrain from sharing business-specific data and also complex data which is in relation to your account. If you have those questions, please reach out to your Google Account Manager or our support team. They'll be more than happy to help. However, if you do have any questions in relation to our account setup and structure that we've covered today, myself and Kelsey will be more than happy to answer any questions that you guys may have in relation to this setup.
Perfect. Cool. So we're just going to go ahead and pull up the questions here. Just give us a second. Perfect. Okay. Do you want to take the first one? Perfect. Yeah, and if you do have any questions, you can just fill them in the chat bar, by the way. Okay, perfect. So the first question is, can you share resources for cross-channel tracking? Our site launches a demo in a pop-up window that's on a different domain, and we lose those sessions at that point. With this, it really depends on if you have access to that domain or not. So this kind of goes back, it's similar to that subdomain tracking, like the PayPal example, where if you have access to that domain and you're able to, place a code on it, depending on how your tracking setting is set up, then you should be able to do that. And then obviously you can do kind of go back to the subdomain tracking where we're making sure we're not setting up a separate session. If you don't have access to that data, then unfortunately we're not going to be able to place a tag on that. So again, I think that's probably working with a third-party provider who would have access to that.
Yeah, in that example, I think exactly as you said, generally you're looking at if the third-party provider can give you access to implement code on that third-party platform, then yes, we can track it. If not, one of the recommendations that I would have is looking at actually just tracking the outbound click towards that. So that would be looking at the event tracking, which we went through earlier on, and looking at someone going from your site through to that pop-up window. That would be the action that we can track, because that's the last resource or point of contact that we have with the user as such. But however, ideally, the third-party provider would give you access to put those conversions back into your analytics platform.
Exactly. Perfect. And then I think, oh, here we go. We've just got another question. The tags and analytics. I'd love to know the different tracking options via tags and analytics, and what are the differences. So I'm assuming this is the different tracking options between Google Ads and, Google Ads and Google Analytics. So I guess I think Ogie went through a few of the differences there. It's really just with Google Ads, you can track individual pages, but we won't be able to track engagement on the site. So the things like the page views, the time on site, those kinds of things, you won't be able to track with the Google Ads tag. And then with analytics, you will be able to track that. I think one key difference then gets into a little bit of the cross-device tracking. So if you're going between like a mobile device to a desktop, then you're probably going to want to use Google Ads tracking. For the time being anyways.
Yeah, and just on to the next question here. So there are several steps of our lead gen form. Currently, we set them at separate goals. Should I set up a funnel under each goal? So essentially, you're totally correct and right. I think, as we mentioned with funnel setup, you should set up individual goals, but add them all to the same funnel. So if you have 5 different steps in your lead generation form, they should all be individual goals, but within each one, you should turn on funnel visualization, and then actually mark them from number, say, 1 to 5 if you have 5 different steps. And therefore, you'll see that in a funnel, essentially, of where your users go from stage 1 to stage 5 and where they potentially drop off. And that essentially is the most straightforward way of doing it. Within your actual, if you want to look at actually if you already have the goal set up, just click into the goal itself and look at editing the goal, and you can simply turn on the funnel visualization. If you want to have any questions on it, I would recommend just reading up the Help Center article, but it's quite a straightforward setup of just enabling the funnel visualization within the goal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is, again, where I would probably check with your account rep, because I think it also depends on your goals. So I've seen some forms that have really, really complex forms that are like 5 pages long, but once they complete the first step of the form, you've already got their name and their contact information, and that's considered a conversion. So I would definitely look at your business to figure out what you think makes sense for you.
Great. So guys, that brings us to the end of our questions for today. So thank you very much for your engagement and for joining the Academy On Air session today covering Google Analytics Health Check. For myself and Kelsey, thank you very much. And
good luck setting up the account.
Yeah.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.